Sometimes, the ones the world calls invisible hold the power to save the very heart of a billionaire's home. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of this journey. The Coleman Mansion stood like a fortress of polished limestone on Fifth Avenue, just across from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Passers-by often slowed their steps, gazing up at the elegant balconies, the arched windows trimmed with wrought iron, and the ornate double doors that rarely opened except for limousines and executives in tailored suits. To New Yorkers, it was the house of Richard Coleman, the tech visionary whose algorithms ran the engines of Wall Street and whose influence stretched from Silicon Valley to Singapore. But inside, beyond the gleaming stone, the air was cold. The silence there was not peace, but vacancy. Alicia Brown had arrived only 3 days earlier. 24 years old, with skin the shade of polished mahogany and hair she braided herself every Sunday, she carried her life in a second-hand duffel bag. She had grown up in the brownstones of Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who cleaned office towers by night and pressed uniforms by day. Her mother, Marlene, had died when Alicia was 16, from a complication that could have been prevented if a clinic had taken her seriously. The image of her mother gasping in the narrow apartment hallway was the wound Alicia carried everywhere. It was that wound which made her take the maid's job at the Coleman estate. It paid little, but it meant a roof she didn't have to fight for and 3 meals she didn't have to count. The agency told her, no questions, no interruptions, no personal opinions. Rich people wanted silence. She promised herself she would obey. Yet on her very first morning, when she stood in the vaulted kitchen scrubbing copper pans that gleamed like mirrors, she noticed a little girl at the edge of the doorway. 10 years old, pale as paper, her thin arms hugged a notebook to her chest. Her eyes, hazel, wide, and watchful, did not move to the staff bustling about. Nobody greeted her. Nobody even looked up. Alicia, startled, dried her hands and whispered, "Hi there." The girl did not answer. She turned and walked away, her slippers silent on the marble floor. One of the older maids hissed under her breath, "Don't talk to her unless spoken to. That's Sophia." Sophia Coleman, the only daughter of Richard Coleman. Born into privilege, yet Alicia could see at once she wasn't a child who had known joy. Later that night, while folding linen in the back quarters, Alicia overheard the nannies talking in hushed tones. Sophia had sickle cell anemia, a disease that twisted her red blood cells into sharp crescents, leaving her weak, sometimes in agony. "The master spares no expense," one nanny said. "Private doctors, private nurses, the best hospital in Manhattan. But he's never here. He thinks care can be outsourced." Another voice answered, with a tinge of bitterness. "It's not money the girl needs. It's her father." Alicia swallowed hard. The words hit too close to her mother's story. Marlene hadn't needed charity. She had needed someone to care enough to stay, to fight the system that dismissed her. And nobody had. Now, folding those white sheets, Alicia felt the weight of an unspoken vow inside her. Not again. Not this child. Her first Sunday at the mansion, Alicia was assigned to sweep the grand hallway that faced Central Park. She paused at the tall windows. Outside, the world glowed in autumn's amber light. Runners jogged past, children flew kites, couples strolled with cups of coffee steaming in their hands. She thought of how many Sundays her mother had promised they'd go to the park together, only to be called in for another shift. Then she heard a cough, sharp, hollow, from behind her. Turning, she saw Sophia again, standing alone. The girl's skin looked almost translucent under the chandeliers, her lips dry. She was dressed in a sweater too big for her frame. Alicia hesitated. Then, ignoring the warning from the older maids, she crouched to meet the child's gaze. "It's beautiful outside," she said softly. "Do you ever get to go?" Sophia's eyes flicked toward the window, then down to the marble floor. She didn't answer. But Alicia saw the longing there. That night in her narrow servant's room, Alicia unpacked her few belongings. At the bottom of her duffel was a scarf, wool frayed at the edges, knitted by her mother during the last winter of her life. It was old, but still warm. Alicia touched it and thought of Sophia's pale throat in the cold air. Maybe, she thought, some things are worth breaking rules for. The next morning, the mansion was unusually restless. Richard Coleman had flown in from Zurich at dawn. Staff scrambled, polishing silver, checking mirrors, lining the driveway with black cars. Alicia caught her first glimpse of him when she stepped into the foyer. Tall, shoulders rigid under a charcoal suit, silver hair cropped close, face unreadable. Cameras followed him as he strode through the door with his entourage, barking instructions about a conference call with Singapore. If Sophia came down, Alicia didn't see her. Richard didn't ask. He was, as the newspapers liked to say, the cold father of Wall Street. A man who saw numbers, not people. That evening, after the chaos of his arrival, Alicia slipped outside during her break. She walked toward Central Park, craving a breath that didn't smell of polish and stone. At the corner, she stopped. There, on a bench beneath a canopy of golden leaves, sat Sophia. Not with her father, not even with the nannies, only a private nurse, distracted, speaking into her phone. The girl sat utterly still, watching other children race with laughter across the lawns. Alicia approached carefully. She did not ask questions. She simply pulled the wool scarf from her coat pocket and offered it. Sophia blinked, surprised. Slowly, she accepted it, her small hands brushing Alicia's. For the first time, her lips curved upward, just slightly, but enough to show she knew what kindness felt like. No words passed between them. None were needed. Inside the Coleman mansion that night, the chandeliers blazed and the corridors echoed with executives discussing strategies worth billions. But in a tiny corner of Central Park, on a bench half forgotten, a bond had been born between a girl who had everything yet nothing and a maid the world refused to see. And though Alicia could not know it then, that bond would one day bring the whole of Fifth Avenue to its knees. Morning in Manhattan carried its own kind of rhythm. Yellow cabs darted through traffic lights, horns blared in impatient symphonies, and the sidewalks swelled with joggers, nannies pushing strollers, and Wall Street men who carried their coffee like ammunition. For most, Central Park was a place of breath, a green lung in the middle of relentless steel. But for Sophia Coleman, it was something else entirely. On a crisp October morning, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs, Alicia was told to accompany the laundry to the basement when she saw a small group of staff gathering near the front entrance. A nurse in pale blue scrubs appeared, holding the arm of a child wrapped in a coat. It was Sophia, her slight frame lost inside the heavy wool. The nurse whispered into her phone, distracted, while Sophia's steps faltered on the marble floor. Alicia slowed her folding, watching quietly from the shadows. The girl was being led toward the park across the avenue. This was rare. The maid said Sophia almost never left the house except for hospital visits. Without thinking, Alicia set her folded linens aside and slipped out a side door. Central Park was alive that morning. Children laughed, chasing one another with scarves trailing like comets. Dogs tugged at leashes, their paws scattering golden leaves. Cyclists whirred by on the paved paths. Sophia sat on a bench near the Bethesda fountain, her body still, her hazel eyes following the children darting across the lawns. They ran with abandon, shrieking joy, their cheeks flushed with health. Alicia approached slowly, careful not to draw the nurse's suspicion. She sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. She said nothing. She didn't ask the usual grown-up questions. How are you? Are you tired? She simply let her gaze rest on the fountain, the angel's wings spread wide above the waters that glittered with sunlight. Minutes passed. Finally, she reached into her coat pocket. The scarf, her mother's last winter gift, frayed but still warm, was folded neatly inside. She held it out, wordless. Sophia blinked, startled by the offering. Her eyes darted to Alicia's face, then to the scarf. Slowly, she accepted it, wrapping it around her thin neck. For the first time since Alicia had seen her, a softness touched her lips. It wasn't a smile exactly, more like the shadow of one, fragile and fleeting. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, so faint it could have been the wind. Alicia's chest tightened. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The nurse returned, frowning at the scarf. "Where did you get that?" Sophia clutched it tighter. "It's mine." The nurse sighed, too weary to argue, and returned to her phone call. Alicia exhaled slowly, her heart racing. She knew she had broken a rule, but for once, the risk felt worth it. Over the next week, Alicia began to notice Sophia in quiet corners of the mansion, sitting cross-legged on the library rug with a book she barely turned, staring out the music room window at the empty courtyard. Always silent. Always alone. One evening, while polishing silver in the dining room, Alicia heard muffled coughing. She looked up to see Sophia clutching her side, her small body trembling. Alicia's instincts screamed to help, but before she could move, a nurse appeared and guided the child away, murmuring medical terms that Alicia only half understood. Later, another maid muttered, "It's the sickle cell. When it flares, it's like knives in the bones." She said it with clinical detachment, as if discussing the weather. Alicia's fists tightened around the cloth she was holding. She remembered her mother gasping in that Brooklyn apartment hallway, dismissed by doctors who never saw her as urgent. That memory returned like a bruise that never faded. The following Sunday, the nurse once again took Sophia to Central Park. This time, Alicia was braver. She followed at a distance, carrying a basket as if on an errand. At the park's edge, Sophia sat on the grass beneath a maple tree, watching children play soccer. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, but her eyes glowed with something Alicia recognized: longing. Alicia sat beside her. "You like soccer?" she asked gently. Sophia's gaze flicked to her, then back to the children. "I used to run," she whispered. Before. Before what?" "Before the pain got worse." Her voice cracked. She pulled her coat tighter, hiding her frail frame. Alicia wanted to reach for her hand, but held back. "You're still here," she said softly. "That counts." Sophia's lips trembled. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like it." The words pierced Alicia deeper than she expected. She thought of her mother again, gone too soon. She thought of herself at 16, standing at a funeral no one important attended, feeling invisible. "No one sees me," Sophia added. Alicia's throat burned. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I see you." Sophia's eyes met hers, wide, searching, as if no one had ever said that before. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Richard Coleman stood on the 48th floor of his Wall Street headquarters. He was being photographed by the Financial Times, praised as the man who turned algorithms into empires. He barely noticed the flashbulbs. His phone buzzed and he waved it off. The world demanded his brilliance. He gave it freely. But his daughter's name never crossed his lips. Back in Central Park, as the sun dipped low and the air chilled, the nurse finally gestured for Sophia to stand. The girl rose slowly, clutching Alicia's scarf tighter around her neck. She whispered something, too faint for the nurse to hear, but Alicia caught it. "Will you be here next time?" Alicia smiled, her heart swelling. Yes, I promise. The promise lodged itself like an anchor. She didn't know how many Sundays she could risk, how many rules she might break. But she knew this. Sophia Coleman, the silent girl in Central Park, was no longer invisible. That night, back in her tiny room beneath the mansion, Alicia placed her hand over her chest. For the first time in years, the wound of her mother's death didn't feel like an endless void. It felt like a compass, pointing her toward something greater. Sophia needed her, and Alicia would not look away. Morning came to Lower Manhattan like a bell struck in a vast cathedral, clear, resonant, impossible to ignore. From the 46th floor of One Liberty Plaza, the glass reflected the white ribs of the Oculus and the river beyond, steel and water braided into a single view. Richard Coleman stood with his hands in his pockets and watched the city wake. He registered the light, the angles, the speed, as if they were numbers in a spreadsheet that would yield a prediction if only he stared long enough. Behind him, conference screens lit one by one. Zurich blinked in first, faces culled by jet lag and alpine efficiency. Then Singapore arrived, immaculate and bright, already deep into their evening. Richard turned without preamble. "Latency on the new Risk engine?" he asked. "Down to 32 milliseconds, his CTO answered. "We'll clear 28 by quarter's end." "Good. Unify the dashboards. I want one view. No ornament, just signal." He moved through decisions like a surgeon through tissue, precise, bloodless, leaving little room for ambiguity or romance. In the room, his lieutenants were used to the cold. They came for it. He had built Coleman systems on a single creed. Feelings are noise. Systems are truth. That creed worked astonishingly well with capital and code. At 8:17 a.m., his chief of staff, Elena Park, slid a folder onto the conference table without a word. He glanced at it between slides. Sophia, written in blue ink, a color his team used for personal items so they wouldn't pollute the main stack. He didn't open it. The Zurich call demanded a signature on an acquisition. Singapore wanted his face for a photo with a minister. Elena knew better than to interrupt the parade. By 9:42, he broke. 5 minutes. He opened the folder in the privacy of glass. Charts waited inside, color-coded, pared down to their bones. Oxygen saturation trends, hemoglobin levels, ER visits. A pain scale log rendered as a spare gray line that climbed and fell like the market. There were notes from nurses and a schedule of specialists, hematology at New York Presbyterian, follow-up at Columbia, telehealth consults on Thursdays, hydroxyurea dosing reviewed. A concierge physician summarized 3 bullet points and recommended an updated pain protocol for winter months. Richard scanned, circled a metric, and wrote, "Consolidate platforms. Build a single care dashboard with alerts. No variability. Predict and preempt failures." Elena, watching, waited for the thing that never came. How did she sleep? Did she smile? Questions like that belonged to a different language, one he had never learned. He closed the folder. Send an RFP for a home care ops app. Sensors, adherence, hydration, ambient temperature. If the living room drops below 68, I want an alert. Elena nodded, tucked the folder under her arm, and moved like a shadow. This was how care looked when designed by an engineer. Rules and redundancies. Fail-safes layered like armor against chaos. The armor worked until it didn't. At noon, the magazine crew arrived, wrists jangling with press passes, cameras draped like talismans for influence. Today's cover would read, "The Man of Steel on Wall Street." They arranged him by the window with the skyline as his crown. A young reporter, green but eager, asked questions he could have answered in his sleep. "Where does your conviction come from, Mr. Coleman? How do you keep fear out of the equation? Systems, he said, letting the word sit like a fact. We trust the process. When you build for worst case, emotion becomes irrelevant. And at home? The reporter ventured, encouraged by a producer's nod. You're famously private, but our readers love to know how leaders balance life. He gave the practiced half smile that moved headlines without giving anything away. I have exceptional people. We hire the best. The system scales. The reporter scribbled, not understanding what Alicia would have heard instantly. In Richard Coleman's universe, love was a redundancy that could be outsourced. Trust flowed up to dashboards and down to protocols. It did not settle in hands. They shot him from three-quarter angles, cool and invulnerable, light glinting off the cufflinks his assistant selected for stern warmth. When they left, the silence returned, clinical as an operating theater after the body is wheeled away. He reached Fifth Avenue in dusk, the park black lace under a violet sky. The mansion doors swallowed him, the click of the lock as discreet as a secret. The staff assembled for the ritual debrief. Estate manager with a clipboard, sommelier with 2 tastings ready, though he rarely drank, a nurse in scrubs, hair pulled back, deference ironed flat. Status, please, he said. The nurse began. Mild pain episodes in the morning, managed with acetaminophen and warm compresses. No fever, vitals stable, encouraging hydration. We'll review hydroxyurea labs on Wednesday. Good, he said, already moving. Increase room humidity to 40%. Teach the night staff to recognize dehydration earlier. He paused at the threshold of the library. A small form curled on the velvet chaise by the window. Sophia, asleep, cheek turned to the glass, the scarf around her neck like a soft sentence. He noticed, without registering why, that it looked hand-knit and vastly out of place among cashmere throws and Italian wool. It held heat with a stubbornness he recognized in no fabric he'd ever purchased. Her cough, a little one, broke the room's poise. He stood, an unmoving pillar in the doorway, the way he sometimes stood over a terminal watching code compile. The nurse stepped past him and adjusted the child with practiced hands. He gave a short nod, the kind men give in battles they do not fight, and withdrew. Upstairs, an email to Elena drafted itself from muscle memory. Find a home humidification vendor. Also, research cold weather triggers in pediatric sickle cell, best practices from Cleveland Clinic and St. Jude. Summarize in 1 page, bullet points only. He slept like an executive, 5 hours, tight as a fist. The next morning carved itself from habit. He ran on the Peloton for 40 minutes reading macros and markets. He showered in water set to 1 precise degree, then tied the same tie he wore whenever he negotiated over $100 million, a wool navy that never blinked. He glanced at the family portrait the PR team insisted he hang in the 3rd-floor hallway, a younger Richard beside a woman with storm-lit eyes, their infant's face a blur of light. He did not linger. Alicia saw him before he saw her. A flicker of motion at the edge of a corridor. She was carrying a stack of freshly laundered towels, cotton thick enough to pretend at comfort. She stepped aside and kept her eyes lowered. The older maids had drilled the rule, invisible unless summoned. It felt like a kind of vanishing, and she submitted to it when she had to. But in the corner of her mind, she stored the way he glanced without really seeing. It was the look of a man who had entrusted his life to systems and had forgotten what a hand could do. Mr. Coleman, the estate manager said, catching pace beside him. We've updated the emergency plan. There's a laminated quick reference in every room. The on-call nurse rotation is doubled through January. Acceptable, he replied. Run monthly drills. And the girl's request? The manager asked, a hint of discomfort revealing he preferred budgets to children. She's asked to visit the museum on Saturday. The Met. Richard's hesitation lasted less than a breath. Later, when the weather warms. We have enough variables this quarter. Enough variables. That's what Sophia was. A variable to minimize. Alicia felt the word as if it were a draft seeping under a door, chill and relentless. At lunchtime, Richard met two hospital administrators in a private dining room near Wall Street. They discussed partnerships, AI triage, predictive staffing, to be announced at a gala where donors in black tie would applaud the algorithms that might make emergency rooms move with the grace of a trading floor. "We're building a future where care is never late," Richard said, his voice the calm of white marble, "where the machine sees the failure before it happens." The administrators nodded vigorously. They were men who understood that in this city, benevolence and branding shared a handshake. He signed a memorandum of understanding and left before dessert. He did not walk the pediatric floor while he was there. He intended to. His assistant had penciled in 10 minutes. But a call from Singapore arrived with the gravity of weather, and he stepped into the wind instead. Late afternoon, the light thinned, traffic thickened. From the mansion's second-floor landing, Alicia watched Sophia stand at the window, palms pressed to the glass, eyes tilted toward the museum steps where tour buses yawned out students with scarves in school colors. The nurse set a glass of water on the sill and encouraged slow sips. Alicia wished she could bring the city inside. The clatter, the hot pretzels, the violinist whose music in the subway could make a stranger cry. She would have given the girl the whole park if the door would let her. Richard crossed the hall, phone at his ear, brow furrowed. He saw the two figures in silhouette against the winter sky. The small one, still and expectant. The other, the Maid, a ribbon of resolve drawn straight. Something in the line of them tugged. Memory, perhaps, but the call in his ear detonated with a problem only he could solve. "Move the deadline," he said into the receiver, already turning. "Ship on Friday, not Monday. No slip." No slip. He did not see how quietly hope slips out of a child when a father passes without stopping. That evening, he convened a meeting in the study to review the estate's emergency protocols. He demanded clarity the way a pilot demands weather, everything visible, nothing implied. The estate manager presented laminated flowcharts. The head of security ran through transport contingencies. The lead nurse spoke about signs of crisis, fever over 101 degrees, oxygen saturation under 94, pain in the chest that might warn of acute chest syndrome, dehydration that could turn a morning into a night in the ER. "Rehearse it," he said. "Quarterly. We will not be surprised." Alicia stood at the back with the other maids and butlers, hands clasped, eyes forward. Laminates looked like control until you needed wonder. She knew that from a hallway in Brooklyn, from the way her mother's breath thinned like winter light and no one came. She did not doubt the value of drills. She doubted the superstition that drills alone could save you. When the meeting ended, Richard lingered with the nurse. "You have everything you need?" he asked, the question he asked every division head from Zurich to Singapore. "We have supplies," the nurse said. "We don't have a father." It was too honest, and it startled them both. She apologized, but the sentence was already in the room like a draft that could not be sealed. Richard inclined his head and did not answer. Later, upstairs, he opened his laptop and wrote a note to Elena to find a new nurse, then deleted it. He wasn't sure whether he sought a smoother tone or whether a rough edge had been necessary to catch him. He closed the computer without sending anything at all. He retreated to the gym and rode 5,000 meters against nothing, breath steady, eyes on numbers that responded to force with obedience. In the mirror, he looked like a man who had outpaced need. The monitors showed lines and calories, proof of effort. They did not show the door down the hall where a child slept with a scarf around her neck that had no brand, only a story. In bed, sleep came as it always came to him, in clean sheets and white noise. He did not wake to check her breathing. He trusted the alerts. On her narrow mattress in the servants' row, Alicia wrote Sophia's name on a scrap of paper and tucked it into a pocket sewn into the lining of her sweater. It was a small, private refusal to let the girl be Data. Names mattered. Names could pull a person back from the edge. The city exhaled. Sirens stitched through the dark. A harbor horn moaned. In the great, careful house on Fifth Avenue, everything looked, on paper, perfect. Alerts configured, rotations scheduled, dashboards debugged, a machine built to keep hurt at bay. The machine hummed, the child slept. And somewhere, under the beautiful hum, a flaw waited, the way December waits at the edge of autumn. Rain fell over Manhattan with the relentlessness of a confession no one wanted to hear. It streaked the stone facades of the Upper East Side, blurred the lights of Fifth Avenue, and drummed a rhythm against the towering glass of Richard Coleman's mansion. Inside, the corridors gleamed as if the storm outside could not touch them. But storms have a way of entering where silence already lives. Alicia Brown had been polishing silver candlesticks in the dining room that morning when she heard the sound. It wasn't the usual cough or faint whimper that had begun to punctuate Sophia's days. This was sharper, like a blade slicing the air, followed by a hollow gasp. She dropped the cloth instinctively and ran. She found Sophia in the library, curled on the velvet chaise. Sweat poured down the girl's temples. Her small chest rose in frantic, shallow breaths. Each inhale sounded as if her lungs were being carved from the inside. The scarf Alicia had given her weeks earlier was damp with moisture. "Baby girl, breathe with me," Alicia whispered, kneeling beside her. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow." Sophia's lips quivered. "Hurts. Like knives." Her words were cut into fragments, each one wrung from pain. Panic clawed at Alicia's throat, but she forced her hands to stay steady. She reached for the house phone on the desk and dialed the nurse's extension. No answer. She dialed again. Nothing. She slammed the receiver down and darted into the hall. "Somebody call the nurse! Now!" Two older maids emerged, faces pale but detached. One shook her head. "She's off rotation till noon. Use the estate manager." "The estate manager?" Alicia's voice rose, incredulous. "The child can't breathe." The other maid shrugged, eyes lowering. "Protocol, Alicia. We don't move without clearance." Protocol. The word felt obscene in the face of a child convulsing in pain. Alicia grabbed her cell phone from her apron and dialed 911. The line rang, but the operator's voice was distant and crackling. "All circuits are busy. Please hold." Rainstorms often choked the networks. She tried again. The same monotone reply. Frantic, she remembered the list of emergency hospitals pinned in the staff kitchen. She ran there, nearly slipping on the marble floor, and scanned it with desperate eyes. New York Presbyterian, ICU full. Mount Sinai, overflow capacity. St. Luke's, Lenox Hill. Each note carried the same haunting word: no beds available. Her mother's face flickered before her eyes. 16-year-old Alicia, holding Marlene's hand as she gasped in their Brooklyn brownstone hallway, waiting for an ambulance that came too late. Doctors had said they were sorry, but the ER had been overcrowded. That night, Alicia had sworn never to let another loved one be abandoned by the system. And here it was again. The cruel machine of American healthcare, efficient on paper, collapsing when a body cried for mercy. She bolted back to Sophia. The girl was paler now, eyes half closed, each breath shorter. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Stay." Alicia tried the nurse's number again, then Richard's private office line, voicemail. She screamed into the receiver, "Sophia is in crisis, please!" She slammed it down, breath ragged. For one paralyzing second, she stood frozen. The weight of rules pressed down, the laminated protocols, the estate's hierarchy, the invisible wall between servant and master. And then, something broke inside her. "No," she whispered. "Not again. Not this time." She looked toward the stairwell that led down to the basement. She remembered the master key the estate manager had shown her 3 nights ago. Richard's office was locked, but the staff needed access in case of fire. Alicia had watched closely. She had a memory that never let go of details. She scooped Sophia into her arms. The girl whimpered, limp but clinging weakly to the scarf at her neck. Alicia's heart thundered as she carried her down the winding stairs. The basement corridors smelled of wax and stone. She reached the locked oak door marked Private, Richard Coleman, CEO. Her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock. For a moment, she thought she'd misremembered. Then the tumblers clicked, and the door swung open. Inside was a world no maid was meant to see. Mahogany desk, walls of glass screens flashing live tickers, shelves lined with awards. On the far side, behind a panel of smoked glass, a biometric safe glowed faintly green. She set Sophia gently on the leather sofa. "Hold on, baby," she whispered, stroking her damp hair. Then she turned to the safe. She had overheard the estate manager mention Richard's habit of leaving a manual override in case of system failure. Alicia scanned the room until she found a narrow panel slightly ajar. Inside, a keypad, a slip of paper tucked above it with a string of numbers, likely a backup code. Hands shaking, she entered it. The safe hissed open. Stacks of cash sat in crisp bundles, a gleaming key fob with the Tesla logo beside them. Alicia seized both. As she turned, she froze. A red light blinked on the corner of the ceiling. Security camera. Every move she'd made was recorded. The estate had no tolerance for disobedience. In minutes, she would be marked as a thief. But the child gasping on the sofa silenced every hesitation. She stuffed $20,000 into her apron, pocketed the keys, and lifted Sophia again. The girl's breath rattled. "We're going to the hospital," Alicia whispered, tears streaking her cheeks. "And I don't care what they call me." On the main floor, the mansion was alive with staff moving like ants. The estate manager shouted orders into a headset, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath him. Alicia darted past the kitchens, down the service corridor, and burst into the garage. The Tesla Model X gleamed under fluorescent lights. Alicia hit the fob. The doors unfolded like wings. She slid Sophia into the back seat, buckled her in, then leapt behind the wheel. The engine hummed awake. Alicia gripped the wheel, knuckles white. The cameras blinked again from the corners of the garage, capturing every detail. With a roar, the Tesla surged forward into the rain. The city blurred around her. Tires hissed against slick pavement, horns blared, lights smeared red and white across her windshield. Alicia drove with a desperation that left no room for hesitation. She headed toward FDR Drive, toward New York Presbyterian, praying that the pediatric hematology unit would find a way, any way, to save the girl. Behind her, alarms were surely rising in the Coleman mansion. Security would already be reviewing footage. The estate manager would call Richard, who would call the police. By sundown, Alicia Brown would be no longer a maid. She would be a fugitive. But she did not care, because in her arms, a child's heartbeat still fluttered. And she would fight the whole city if that's what it took to keep it alive. The rain outside hadn't eased. It slashed across Manhattan like silver whips, blurring the outlines of skyscrapers, drumming on windshields, turning the avenues into rivers of light and water. Inside the Coleman mansion, order was fraying. Staff rushed through the marble halls, voices sharp, radios crackling with confusion. Somewhere between the storm and the silence of the estate's rules, a boundary had been crossed. But downstairs, in the heart of the Brownstones' basement, Alicia Brown had already made her choice. She stood before the safe, chest heaving, Sophia limp in her arms. The room smelled of polished leather and cedar, the air conditioning humming like a machine indifferent to human desperation. Sophia whimpered, breath shallow, eyes glazed. The child's small fingers clutched at Alicia's blouse as if even in near unconsciousness, she knew who would fight for her. "No one's coming," Alicia whispered, half to the girl, half to the ghosts of her own past. "It's us now." She turned toward the wall panel she had glimpsed before. The estate manager's voice echoed in memory. "In case of a power failure, there's always a manual override." Alicia had paid attention. She always did. Her fingers shook as she pulled back the mahogany trim. A keypad glowed faintly beneath. Above it, almost careless, a slip of paper rested with numbers scribbled in Richard's precise hand. She swallowed, pressed the digits. Beep, beep, beep. The final press felt like crossing a line she could never return from. The safe clicked. The heavy door released with a whisper of hydraulics. Inside, neat stacks of cash glimmered under soft LED light. There were envelopes marked Zurich, Singapore, CapEx Reserve, and beside them, a sleek black fob etched with the silver Tesla logo. For a heartbeat, Alicia froze. She knew the cameras in the ceiling had already captured her, red dots blinking with quiet judgment. She knew every movement would be reviewed, every headline twisted. Black Maid steals billionaire's fortune. The thought nearly broke her. But Sophia moaned again, her breath rattling like glass. And in that sound was the only verdict that mattered. Alicia grabbed 2 bundles of cash, $20,000 by rough count, and the key fob. She stuffed the money into her apron pocket, clutched the fob in her palm, and turned back to the sofa where Sophia lay. "Stay with me," she begged, stroking damp hair from the child's forehead. "Just hold on a little longer." She scooped Sophia up, braced herself against the weight of fear, and rushed out. Upstairs, the estate manager barked into his radio, "Check every corridor! Secure the garage!" But Alicia was faster. She slipped through the service stairwell, her steps echoing against concrete. At the bottom, she shoved open the heavy steel door into the underground garage. Rows of luxury vehicles gleamed under fluorescent lights. A Bentley, a Mercedes Maybach, 2 Teslas. For a moment, Alicia faltered. Which one? Then the fob answered with a chirp. Headlights flared white against the rain-streaked glass. The Tesla Model X. She yanked open the Falcon door, laid Sophia gently across the back seat, and buckled her in. The girl stirred, whispering incoherent words. Alicia kissed her damp forehead. "It's okay, baby. We're moving now." She climbed into the driver's seat. The console lit up, sterile and futuristic. Alicia had driven her mother's old Ford once or twice in Brooklyn, nothing close to this spaceship of leather and touchscreens, but instinct had its own language. She pressed the start. The Tesla purred awake. In the corner of her eye, she caught movement. 2 guards entering the garage, radios raised. Panic surged. Alicia floored the accelerator. The Tesla shot forward, tires squealing on polished concrete. The guards leapt aside as the car smashed through the garage gate, shattering rain into diamonds of spray. Fifth Avenue roared before her. Horns blared, pedestrians shouted, umbrellas turned inside out. Alicia merged into the chaos, hands gripping the wheel, eyes locked on the road ahead. New York Presbyterian, she muttered. East 68th. Her heart thundered. She had no GPS, no chauffeur's map. But she knew the grid of the city like the back of her hand from years of navigating subway shifts, food deliveries, desperate errands. She turned south, merging onto FDR Drive, rain lashing the windshield. Behind her, headlights multiplied. A black SUV, Coleman Security, slid into the lane, closing fast. No, 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 Alicia whispered, pushing the Tesla harder. The electric motor surged, sleek and silent. The speedometer climbed, but Manhattan traffic had its own rules. Congestion snarled near the 59th Street Bridge. Cars pressed close, horns screaming. Alicia's breath hitched. Sophia's weak moan echoed behind her. She made a decision. Hands tight, she swung into the emergency lane, barreling past stalled cars. Rain splashed against her windows, tires skidding inches from barriers. Drivers shouted, fists pounding their horns. Sophia coughed, a fragile sound, and Alicia shouted back, not in anger but in defiance of fate. Hold on, sweetheart. Hold on for me. Back at the mansion, Richard's phone vibrated with an urgent call. He was still at his Wall Street office, discussing algorithmic models with Zurich. The estate manager's voice erupted through the line. Sir, your maid, Alicia Brown, she broke into your office. She's stolen cash, stolen the Tesla. She has Sophia with her. We have footage. For a moment, Richard said nothing. His jaw tightened. Where are they now? Heading toward FDR, sir. Security is in pursuit. Police have been alerted. Richard's chest burned with a strange mixture of fury and fear. A maid, a stranger, had laid hands on his daughter, taken his car, broken his systems. But underneath the anger, something colder twisted. Why had she needed to? He ended the call, face stone. The boardroom around him fell silent. Zurich executives staring, unsure why the man of steel had paled. On FDR Drive, Alicia swerved between taxis and trucks, adrenaline carrying her where training never had. She saw the green exit signs flashing, 63rd, 68th, like beacons. Her pulse hammered in rhythm with the wipers. The SUV behind her was gaining. Red and blue lights flickered farther back. Police. Sophia groaned, her head lolling. Alicia reached one hand back for a second, brushing the girl's fingers. I'm here. You're not alone. Just a few more minutes. The exit loomed. She slammed the turn signal, cutting across 2 lanes. Tires screeched, horns blared. The Tesla shot up the ramp. Ahead, the glowing letters. New York Presbyterian, Weill Cornell Medical Center. Alicia's vision blurred with tears. She pressed harder on the accelerator, ignoring the sirens behind her. In the rearview mirror, the SUV closed in, headlights blazing. Rain turned the world into streaks of light and shadow. Alicia's hands trembled, but her resolve did not. They'll call me a thief, she whispered to herself. But I'll be the thief who saved her. And with that, she drove into the storm, toward the hospital lights that promised either salvation or damnation. The Tesla roared through the storm like a steel arrow, its electric engine silent yet furious, cutting between rivers of headlights. Rain hammered the windshield, relentless sheets that turned Manhattan's skyline into a trembling watercolor. Beneath the Falcon doors, a 10-year-old girl's life flickered in fragile pulses. Sophia's breath rattled. Her small body slumped against the seatbelt. Alicia drove one-handed for a moment, reaching back to touch the child's damp forehead. Stay with me, sweetheart. Don't let go now. You're going to make it. Her voice shook, but her grip on the wheel was iron. Behind them, headlights surged. A black SUV, Coleman Security, slicing through lanes with predatory precision. Further back, red and blue flares bloomed in the mirrors. The NYPD had joined the chase. FDR Drive at night was a gauntlet. Trucks groaned under bridges, taxis swerved like yellow sharks, cyclists clung to wet shoulders. Alicia clenched her jaw, heart slamming against her ribs. She had grown up navigating city chaos on foot and subway. Now she commanded it in steel and horsepower. The Tesla's navigation screen glowed, offering routes, calculating minutes, but Alicia needed no guide. She knew the east side arteries like scars on her palm. She aimed south, tires screaming as the wipers fought to clear her path. Sophia whimpered in the back, voice thin. "It hurts, Mama." The word cut Alicia open. Her own mother's face rose before her eyes, Marlene collapsing in that Brooklyn hallway, breath stolen by a system that had treated her life as a statistic. Alicia pressed harder on the accelerator. "No, baby," she whispered. "Not this time. You've got me." Up ahead, brake lights bloomed crimson, a wall of stalled traffic near 42nd Street. Rain had turned a fender bender into gridlock. Trucks and taxis pressed bumper to bumper, horns wailing in discord. Alicia's stomach dropped. The SUV behind closed fast. Sirens wailed closer, amplified by the rain-slick walls. She yanked the wheel right, swerving into the narrow emergency lane. Concrete barriers loomed inches from her mirrors. Drivers leaned on horns, curses muffled by glass. Alicia ignored them, threading the Tesla through gaps that barely existed. The SUV tried to follow, its bulk scraping against the guardrail, sparks lighting the rain. But Alicia was smaller, faster. She darted past, heart hammering. Sophia groaned again, clutching her chest. Alicia risked a glance, lips pale, eyes glazed. Panic clawed her throat. "Hold on, baby girl. The hospital's close." For a second, the storm blurred into memory. She was 16 again, kneeling beside her mother in their brownstone hallway, dialing 911 again and again. "All lines busy," the operator had said, as if death could be put on hold. Her mother had whispered, "Fight for yourself, Alicia. No one else will." The Tesla jolted over a pothole, snapping her back. "I'm fighting for both of us now," she muttered. The SUV accelerated, metal beast against metal storm. Its tinted windows reflected lightning, its grille inches from the Tesla's bumper. Over the radio, a voice barked, "Stand down and pull over!" Alicia's hands locked tighter. Not while she's still breathing. She swerved left, cutting across 2 lanes. Horns exploded. A delivery truck slammed its brakes, skidding sideways, blocking the SUV for a precious few seconds. Alicia surged forward. Sophia coughed violently, body jerking. "Water!" she gasped. Alicia grabbed a bottle from the console, twisted the cap with one hand, and reached back. The car veered dangerously close to the barrier, tires hissing. She steadied, lifted the bottle to Sophia's lips. "Sip, just sip." The girl swallowed weakly, drops spilling down her chin. Then she slumped again, too weak to hold it. Alicia's chest burned with terror. Rain smeared the signs. In the blur, Alicia saw 68th Street hospitals flash past. She had missed the exit. "No!" she cried, slamming her palm against the wheel. The Tesla shot under the bridge, past the turnoff. The hospital was behind her now. The SUV gained again, headlights flaring white. Police sirens screamed, echoing against the Harlem River. Alicia's mind raced. Next exit, Houston Street. Too far. Sophia didn't have that long. She looked ahead and saw the narrow cut of a service road, barred with orange cones. A lane meant for ambulances, closed for construction. To everyone else, a dead end. To Alicia, salvation. She jerked the wheel. The Tesla smashed through the cones, rubber burning. Sirens shrieked behind her. "Ma'am!" "Stop the vehicle!" a voice boomed through a police loudspeaker. Alicia didn't listen. She drove harder. In the back seat, Sophia's head lolled. Her breathing slowed, chest rising shallow. "No, no, no!" Alicia shouted, tears blurring her sight. She fumbled for the rearview mirror, locking eyes with the child's half-lidded gaze. "Stay awake. Don't you dare leave me now." She remembered the first time Sophia had spoken to her, whispering thank you in Central Park with the scarf wrapped around her neck. She remembered the fragile smile. That smile had broken through 10 years of silence. Alicia couldn't lose it. Her voice rose, fierce as thunder. "Sophia Coleman, you keep breathing. You're more than his systems, more than their protocols. You're here because I see you." A faint sound, like a sigh, escaped Sophia's lips. Her eyelids fluttered, just enough to give Alicia one more ounce of strength. The service road bent sharply, spitting the Tesla back onto the avenue. And there, like a lighthouse in the storm, stood the glowing red letters: New York Presbyterian, Children's Emergency. Alicia's sob burst into laughter, wild and desperate. "We made it, baby! Hold on just one more minute!" She slammed the accelerator. The Tesla leapt forward, splashing through puddles. Guards and police screamed into the entrance behind her. She swung into the ER driveway, brakes screeching, tires hissing steam. Nurses and orderlies looked up, startled, as the Falcon doors opened. Alicia leapt out, rain soaking her hair flat against her face. She unbuckled Sophia, lifted her into her arms, and ran toward the sliding glass doors. "Sickle cell crisis!" she screamed, voice breaking. "She needs transfusion now!" The medical team swarmed, pulling Sophia onto a gurney, shouting vitals, rushing her inside. And then, before Alicia could follow, a hard hand seized her wrist. "Police!" a voice growled. A cuff snapped cold around her arm. Behind them, Richard Coleman's black town car slid into the driveway, headlights slicing the storm. The emergency room glared under fluorescent lights, every corner alive with motion and noise. Monitors beeped in urgent rhythm, stretchers rattled across slick tiles, voices cut the air with commands. Into this storm of precision and panic, Alicia Brown stumbled with Sophia in her arms. The child's skin was clammy, her chest heaving shallowly, lips pale against the wool scarf still knotted at her neck. "She can't breathe! Sickle cell crisis! She needs a transfusion now!" Alicia's cry rang out, and the medical team surged. Hands reached, voices sharpened. They lifted Sophia from her arms onto a gurney, attaching monitors, threading IV lines, sliding an oxygen mask over her face. The girl was swept away toward the trauma bay. Alicia moved to follow but was yanked back, her shoulder wrenched against the wall. A hand clamped down on her wrist, metal snapped tight. "Ma'am, you're under arrest," a police officer growled, pinning her as if she were the threat. "No, please, she needs me," Alicia shouted, fighting the grip, eyes fixed on the doors swinging shut behind Sophia's gurney. Rain still dripped from her hair, her chest heaving. The officer shoved her harder against the wall as other staff turned to stare. The glass doors hissed open again, and Richard Coleman strode in. His suit was immaculate, his face cold stone. Security clustered at his back, administrators hurried to his side, bending under the weight of his presence. His voice sliced through the noise. "Where is my daughter?" "Trauma 2, a nurse answered quickly. "She's stable for now, but it was close." Richard gave a curt nod, then turned to Alicia, still cuffed. The estate manager rushed forward, his words clipped and certain. "Sir, this woman broke into your private office, stole cash and your Tesla, abducted your daughter. We have it all on video." The word abducted landed like a sentence. Alicia's whole body flared with fury. "That's a lie!" she cried, voice shaking but loud enough to turn heads. "I saved her. She was dying in your house while your staff argued over protocols and ICU beds. No one came. If I hadn't taken her, she'd be gone right now." Richard's jaw hardened. "You endangered my child." "No," Alicia shot back, her voice raw. "I kept her alive." The air hung heavy until another voice joined, low but firm, carrying the weight of command earned through saving lives. "Enough." Dr. Harris, head of pediatric hematology, stepped into the hall. His gloves were stained from urgency, his eyes steady. He looked directly at Richard. "If this woman hadn't brought your daughter when she did, you would be mourning her tonight. That's not conjecture. That's fact." The words stilled even the officers. Richard's face flickered, a fracture in the steel. He tried again, quieter now. "She broke into my home." "She carried your daughter through a storm," Harris replied, unwavering, "at risk to herself, more than most of us would dare." The doctor turned to the police. "If you want to process her, do it later. Right now that child needs stability, and I will not have her waking up alone." Silence pressed in. The officers shifted uneasily, eyes flicking between Richard and the doctor. Alicia's breath hitched, her wrists aching in the cuffs. Her gaze never left the trauma doors. Richard exhaled, the sound sharp. "Uncuff her." The officer hesitated. "Sir." "Do it!" The command cracked like thunder. The cuffs fell away. Alicia staggered forward, rubbing her wrists, her eyes wet but unbroken. She turned toward the glass where Sophia lay among wires and monitors, whispering through tears, "I'm here, baby. I'm not leaving you." Richard stood behind her, hands rigid at his sides. For all his power, all his wealth, he was helpless in that moment. Beyond the glass, his daughter's life hung on the skill of strangers and the desperate courage of the maid he had trusted least. An hour passed before Dr. Harris returned. His shoulders sagged with fatigue, but his voice carried relief. "She's stable. Another 30 minutes and we wouldn't be having this conversation." He paused, then added, "She's alive because of her." He nodded toward Alicia. Richard's eyes followed the gesture. He saw her standing motionless, scarf clutched tight, tears still drying on her cheeks. She looked nothing like a thief, nothing like the threat his estate manager had painted. She looked like the reason his daughter still breathed. And for the first time in years, Richard Coleman, the man who believed only in systems, felt the cold certainty of doubt. The hospital room was quieter now, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the kind of silence that held its breath, waiting. Machines hummed softly, their green lines steadying into rhythms, the oxygen mask hissing with each rise and fall of Sophia's chest. Rain tapped faintly against the wide window, its fury spent, reduced now to a whisper. Alicia sat by the bed, her back aching from hours without moving, her hands folded tightly in her lap as if they were holding up the whole room. Her uniform was still damp from the storm, her hair frizzed into curls she hadn't bothered to smooth. None of it mattered. Her eyes never left the girl on the bed. Sophia looked impossibly small against the whiteness of the sheets. Her skin was still pale, but no longer ghostly. The IV dripped quietly, medicine flowing like a lifeline. The scarf Alicia had given her lay folded on the bedside table. Richard Coleman stood in the corner, his arms crossed, the posture of a man used to control but stripped of it. He had not spoken in nearly an hour. He had made his calls, canceled meetings in Zurich and Singapore, barked instructions to the estate manager, even ordered an additional security detail for the hospital floor. But none of it filled the hollow feeling that pressed against his ribs as he watched his daughter fight for breath. At last, Sophia stirred. Her lashes fluttered. A soft whimper slipped from her lips. Alicia leaned forward, heart hammering. "Sophia? Sweetheart, I'm here." The child's hazel eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearing as they landed on the figure closest to her. Her lips parted, dry and trembling. A single word came out, faint but certain. "Alicia." The sound was no louder than the hum of the IV pump, but it cut through the room like a bell. Alicia gasped, tears springing instantly. She reached for the girl's hand, holding it carefully as though it were porcelain. "Yes, baby. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sophia's fingers curled weakly around hers, and then, for the first time in years, her lips shaped into something that almost looked like a smile. From the corner, Richard froze. He had stood witness to boardrooms roaring with applause, had watched entire markets rise on his words, but nothing had ever hollowed him so completely as hearing his daughter speak the maid's name before his own. Sophia had not spoken his name in months, not once. He remembered his late wife, pale in a hospital bed, accusing him with a weary voice. "You are cold, Richard. You live with numbers, not hearts." He had dismissed it then, claiming he would build a system that prevented failure, that spared their daughter from chaos. But now he saw the truth in the echo of her words. He had built systems and structures, yes, but he had built walls, too. Walls his daughter had never been able to climb. Sophia whispered again, this time clearer, eyes locked on Alicia. "Don't leave me." Alicia bent low, pressing her forehead gently to the girl's hand. "Never, sweetheart. I promise you'll never be alone." Richard felt something break inside him. He had spent a lifetime perfecting detachment, using logic as armor, but in that moment he was naked in the face of a truth he had refused to see. His daughter trusted someone else more than him. And it wasn't because he lacked resources, it was because he lacked presence. He stepped forward, uncertain, his voice rasping. "Sophia, I'm here too." The girl's eyes flicked toward him, lingering for a moment, but they did not soften. She turned back to Alicia, her tiny hand still clinging. Richard's throat tightened. He had won every battle that mattered in business, but here, before his child, he was losing a war he hadn't even realized he was fighting. Dr. Harris entered quietly, scanning the monitors, his expression easing. "She's stable now. That transfusion saved her. The crisis has passed." He looked at Alicia, not Richard. "She knew you were here. That matters more than medicine." Richard bristled at the implication, but he couldn't argue. The evidence was right there, in the way Sophia's weak grip refused to let Alicia go. For the rest of the night, Alicia sat at Sophia's bedside, whispering small comforts, singing a hymn her mother once hummed in their Brooklyn kitchen. Richard remained standing, silent, watching as the two most fragile and resilient people in his world clung to each other. It was near dawn when Sophia drifted back into steady sleep. Alicia finally leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her bones, but she kept her hand wrapped in the girl's. Richard studied her profile, the weariness etched deep, the quiet strength that no wealth could buy. She looked nothing like the invisible servant he had hired. She looked like the anchor his daughter had been missing. The storm outside had ended. But in Richard's chest, another one had begun, a reckoning with himself. The storm had broken by morning, but Manhattan's air still carried the smell of wet pavement and exhaust, the kind of raw scent that clung to the city after a night of chaos. News traveled faster than rain, and before the sun reached its peak, the Coleman mansion on Fifth Avenue had already become a stage, and camera vans lined the curb. Reporters crowded the wrought iron gates, umbrellas tilted against the dripping trees of Central Park. Headlines had already exploded across the city. Black Maid steals billionaire's car with child inside. Coleman heiress abducted in midnight chase. Scandal at Fifth Avenue mansion. Each headline twisted the truth into spectacle, and the crowd came hungry for more. Inside, Richard Coleman stood before a mirror in his study, his reflection stark against the mahogany-paneled walls. He wore the armor he knew best: a navy suit, crisp white shirt, tie knotted with precision. But today the suit felt heavier. He could hear Sophia's voice still echoing in his mind, the faint whisper that had cut him deeper than any market loss. Alicia. Behind him, Alicia sat in a simple chair, wrists free now, but her posture tense. She looked out the window toward the swarm of cameras. Her uniform was wrinkled, hair tied back hastily, eyes shadowed from a night without rest. Yet she carried a quiet dignity, the same strength that had carried Sophia through the storm. "Do you want me to speak?" she asked softly, breaking the silence. Richard shook his head. "They won't listen to you. They'll only listen to me." "But it's my story," she replied. Her words lodged in him, because they were true. He was about to tell her story with the weight of his name, his wealth, his podium. Yet without her, he would have no story to tell at all. The estate manager entered briskly, a sheaf of notes in hand. "Mr. Coleman, the press expects a statement in 5 minutes. I've prepared remarks, emphasize that the situation is under investigation, that your daughter is safe, that the maid will face consequences. We can frame it as an unfortunate breach of trust." Richard looked at him, and for the first time in years, the cold mask slipped. His voice was quiet but sharp. "Burn those notes." The man blinked. "Sir?" "I said burn them." The estate manager faltered, then withdrew, stunned into silence. Richard turned back to Alicia. "Come with me." The iron gates loomed ahead as they stepped outside, the crowd of journalists surging forward, microphones thrust like weapons. Cameras flashed, bursts of light exploding against the gray morning. The security detail raised their hands, holding the press at bay. Richard stepped forward, raising a hand. The noise dimmed, anticipation thick as the storm clouds still clinging to the horizon. "My name is Richard Coleman," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd with the practiced authority of a man who had spent decades commanding boardrooms. "Last night, my daughter suffered a medical crisis. She was in danger of losing her life." The reporters jostled, pens scratching, cameras rolling. "She survived," Richard continued, his eyes steady, "because one person in this house did not wait for permission. She acted when systems failed. She broke rules. She risked everything. And she saved my child." The words struck like stones thrown into still water. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He gestured behind him. Alicia stepped forward hesitantly, the cameras snapping like firecrackers. For the first time, the city saw her, not as a blurry figure in a leaked security photo, not as a headline villain, but as a young woman standing tall, though exhausted, her dark eyes clear with quiet conviction. "This is Alicia Brown," Richard said. His voice softened, but carried. "Until yesterday, the world would have called her invisible. A maid in my house, a name no one knew. Today, I tell you, she is the reason my daughter is alive. She is no criminal. She is a hero." The silence that followed was not empty, it was stunned. Richard drew a breath. From this day forward, Alicia Brown will never again be a servant in this household. Instead, she will stand as director of the Coleman Children's Health Foundation, with full authority and a $10 million endowment. Because no child in this city, no matter the color of their skin or the balance of their parents' bank account, should suffer or die waiting for care. The crowd erupted. Shouts rang from every direction. "Mr. Coleman, are you serious?" "Miss Brown, how do you feel?" "Is this damage control?" "Why trust her with so much responsibility?" Alicia stood frozen, Her breath caught in her throat. $10 million. A foundation. The words seemed unreal, like figures on paper instead of the flesh and blood truth of her life. She thought of her mother, Marlene, gasping in that Brooklyn hallway. She thought of all the children in waiting rooms turned away for lack of insurance, for lack of space. Her lips trembled, but she forced herself to speak. I didn't save Sophia for money. I did it because she's a child who needed someone to see her. That's all I ever wanted. For someone to see my mother when she was dying. For someone to see me. Her voice shook, but grew steadier. Now, maybe we can see others too. The murmurs turned into applause. Not all, not unanimous, but enough. Inside the mansion, the news broadcast live, screens filling with the image of a billionaire standing beside his maid, declaring her a hero. Social media split in half. Some doubted, calling it theater. Others flooded with praise, hailing Alicia as the courage the system lacked. But inside the gates, with cameras flashing, something had shifted. For the first time, Richard Coleman did not stand as the cold father of Wall Street. He stood as a man finally learning what it meant to fight for the one thing no algorithm could measure: presence. And beside him, Alicia Brown, the woman the world had tried to make invisible, was now undeniable. Winter lingered over Manhattan, a pale hush drifting across Central Park. Snow crusted the branches, muffling the noise of the city. Yet inside the Coleman mansion, a different kind of silence reigned. No longer the cold emptiness that had haunted its halls, but the quiet warmth of presence. Sophia Coleman sat upright on the velvet chaise where weeks before she had collapsed in pain. Her cheeks carried color now, soft roses against her pale skin. The scarf Alicia had given her, frayed, imperfect, beloved, was wrapped around her shoulders. She scribbled in a notebook the lines of a story she had begun to write. About storms and heroes, about how sometimes the people no one notices turn out to be the ones who save you. Across from her, Alicia Brown arranged papers on the dining table, documents bearing the bold title, Coleman Children's Health Foundation. $10 million had been seeded into its accounts, but it wasn't the money that gave Alicia's hands their steady pride. It was the mission. Clinics in Harlem and Brooklyn had already reached out. Community nurses asked for resources, and families who had once waited for hours in overcrowded ERs were finally being heard. Richard entered quietly. His suits were still tailored, his shoes still gleamed, but there was a difference in the way he walked now. His phone remained in his pocket. His eyes went first to his daughter. "How is the writing?" he asked. Sophia looked up. For the first time in years, her smile reached her eyes. "It's a story about a girl who didn't give up." Richard swallowed hard, his gaze flicking briefly toward Alicia. "She sounds like someone I know." Alicia met his eyes not with deference but with calm steadiness. There was no hierarchy here, only shared ground. That evening they drove together to Harlem, where the Foundation's first clinic would open. The brownstone stood on a corner street, lights glowing against the winter dusk. Inside, walls had been painted with murals of children running through meadows and climbing trees, visions of a life not limited by hospital corridors. Nurses unpacked boxes of supplies, IV kits, blankets, pediatric monitors. In one room, a tiny exam bed waited, sheets crisp, ready for the first child who would come through the doors. A crowd had gathered outside. Families from the neighborhood, local activists, doctors, nurses, volunteers, all bundled against the cold, their faces lit with expectation. Richard stepped to the microphone, the crowd quieting. He spoke differently now, not as the man of steel, but as a father who had been broken open. "There was a time I believed systems could fix everything," he said, "that protocols and dashboards would protect what mattered most. but systems failed my daughter. What saved her was a woman who saw her when no one else did. He gestured toward Alicia, standing at his side. Applause erupted, warm and fierce against the cold night. This foundation, Richard continued, belongs to her. To every nurse, every parent, every child who has ever been told to wait when waiting meant death. We will not wait any more. Alicia stepped forward, her voice softer but no less powerful. When I was 16, I lost my mother because no one listened. I promised myself I'd fight so no other child would stand in that hallway alone. This place is that promise. The applause grew, echoing against the brownstones, rising into the night sky. Sophia tugged Alicia's sleeve. Can I say something? The microphone lowered to her height. She clutched her scarf, her voice small but steady. My daddy builds big things, but Alicia built the biggest thing, hope, and I'm alive because of it. The crowd fell silent, many brushing tears from their cheeks. Then came the roar of clapping, louder than before. Richard closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed. For the first time, he wasn't the architect of the applause. He was a witness. Inside, the ribbon was cut. The clinic opened its doors. A mother entered first, holding the hand of a little boy coughing into his sleeve. Nurses welcomed them in, no insurance cards demanded, no endless forms, just care. Richard stood back, his arm around Sophia's shoulders, watching as Alicia knelt to greet the boy, smiling at him as though he were the only child in the world. And in that moment, Richard saw what billions had never bought him: redemption. The mansion on Fifth Avenue no longer felt like a mausoleum. Its halls echoed with laughter again. Sophia's laughter, bright and real, carrying through the windows that once framed only shadows. Alicia was no longer a servant, but the heartbeat of a new legacy. For Sophia, each day became a little lighter. Her illness remained, but it no longer defined her. She walked in Central Park wrapped in her scarf, her father finally at her side, Alicia's hand steady in hers. And for Alicia Brown, once invisible, once voiceless, she had become more than a maid, more than a survivor. She had become a symbol of compassion the city could not ignore. The story ended not in marble halls or boardrooms, but in the laughter of a child whose life had been saved, and in the quiet knowledge that true wealth is not measured in millions, but in moments of presence, of courage, of hope. The mansion on Fifth Avenue had found its heartbeat again. And in that heartbeat, a foundation was born, not of stone or steel, but of love. Sometimes, true heroes are not the ones with wealth or power, but the ones who dare to see the forgotten, who choose love over fear, presence over systems. Alicia's courage saved a child, healed a father, and built a legacy of hope that money alone could never buy. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so we can continue walking together on this journey of healing and compassion. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.